What if I told you there exists a nation that was conquered not once, not twice, but again and again for over 300 years, and still refused to break? A land of more than 7,000 islands, surrounded by oceans, rich in culture, gold, and identity, yet constantly targeted by powerful empires. First came foreign explorers, chasing glory and discovery. But what they found was not an empty land. It was a civilization already alive. Then came an empire that ruled for centuries, changing beliefs, controlling lives, and rewriting the future of an entire people. And just when freedom seemed within reach, another power arrived, promising liberation, but bringing a new kind of control. War followed, brutal, relentless, and unforgiving, where villages burned, families suffered, and hope was pushed to its limits. Then came one of the darkest chapters in human history, when the world itself was at war, and these islands became a battlefield once again. Bombs fell from the sky, cities turned to ruins, and survival became the only goal. But here's the truth they didn't expect. No matter how many times this land was invaded, no matter how many times its people were pushed down, they rose again and again and again. Because this is not just the story of a country. This is the story of resilience, of identity, of a people who refused to disappear. This is the history of the Philippines. Let us know the whole story, so stay connected with us in this whole story.
Thousands of years ago, long before the world ever knew the name Philippines, these scattered islands were already alive with mystery, beauty, and human ambition. Surrounded by endless oceans and shaped by nature's power, these lands became home to some of the most fearless explorers in early human history. The first settlers arrived by sea, navigating vast and unpredictable waters without maps, guided only by the stars above and their deep instinct for survival. These early people, known as the Austronesians, were not just travelers, but master seafarers who would spread across thousands of islands. They didn't just arrive and survive. They built communities, created traditions, and formed a civilization deeply connected to the land and sea. Along the coasts, families lived by fishing, casting nets into clear blue waters that provided life and sustenance every single day. Inland, people learned to cultivate crops, slowly transforming the landscape into fertile lands that supported growing populations. Villages began to take shape, forming organized communities that would become the foundation of early Filipino society. Each of these communities was known as a barangay, a small but powerful unit led by a respected chief. At the center of every barangay stood the datu, a leader chosen for strength, wisdom, and the ability to protect his people. Life in these early societies was governed not by written laws, but by traditions, customs, and a strong sense of honor. Despite their simplicity, these communities were highly structured, with clear roles, responsibilities, and social systems. Women played important roles, often holding positions of power within both the family and the community. Some women became spiritual leaders known as babaylan, guiding rituals and connecting the people to the spiritual world. These spiritual figures were deeply respected, believed to hold the power to heal, guide, and protect the community. Wealth and status were often displayed through gold, which was abundant and skillfully crafted into jewelry and ornaments. Warriors marked their bodies with tattoos, each design representing courage, battles fought, and victories earned. Life was not only about survival, but also about celebration,
with festivals filled with music, dance, and firelight. But these islands were never isolated from the outside world, as trade connected them to distant civilizations. Ships from China, India, and the Middle East regularly arrived, bringing goods, ideas, and cultural influences. Chinese merchants traded silk, ceramics, and valuable goods in exchange for gold and local resources. Indian influence introduced elements of culture, belief systems, and early philosophies into the islands. Arab traders brought Islam, which began to spread across the southern regions of the Philippines. Over time, powerful Islamic sultanates emerged, especially in Mindanao and the Sulu archipelago. These sultanates were not small or weak. They were organized, influential, and deeply connected to global trade networks. They established systems of governance, law, and military strength that shaped the region. The Philippines was becoming a vibrant crossroads of cultures, religions, and economic exchange. It was a place where different worlds met, blended, and evolved into something entirely unique. But across the vast ocean, another world was expanding, driven by curiosity, ambition, and conquest. European powers were searching for new lands, new trade routes, and new opportunities to expand their influence. This age of exploration would soon bring them face to face with the islands of the Philippines. In 1521, a fleet of ships appeared on the horizon, marking the arrival of a new and unfamiliar presence. Leading this expedition was Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer sailing under the Spanish flag. He was not searching for the Philippines specifically, but his journey would forever change its destiny. As his ships approached the islands, curiosity and tension filled the air between the newcomers and the locals. The first encounters were cautious, as both sides tried to understand each other's intentions. Gifts were exchanged, creating a fragile sense of trust between two completely different worlds. Magellan began forming alliances with local leaders, seeing an opportunity to expand influence. Along with trade and diplomacy, he introduced something new to the islands: Christianity. Some leaders accepted this new religion, seeing it as a way to strengthen alliances with the foreigners. But not everyone welcomed this change, and resistance quickly began to grow. On the island of Mactan, one leader refused to submit to foreign authority. His name was Lapu-Lapu, a warrior who chose independence over submission. He stood firm, refusing to bow to Magellan's demands or accept foreign control. What followed was one of the most iconic battles in Philippine history. Armed with courage and determination, local warriors prepared to defend their land. Magellan, confident in his superior weapons and armor, underestimated his opponent. The battle began in the shallow waters of Mactan, where European tactics became less effective. Spears, blades, and sheer willpower clashed against guns and armor. In a dramatic turn of events, Magellan was struck down in battle. His defeat shocked the European forces and forced them to retreat. For the people of the islands, it was a powerful symbol of resistance and strength. It proved that even powerful foreign forces could be challenged and defeated. But this victory would not stop what was coming next. Spain would return, stronger and more determined than before. This time, they came not just to explore, but to conquer and control. Over the following decades, Spanish forces gradually established their presence across the islands. They named the archipelago Las Islas Filipinas, in honor of King Philip II of Spain. With this, a new era began, one that would last for more than 300 years. The age of Spanish colonization had officially begun, forever changing the course of Philippine history. As Spanish rule tightened its grip over the islands, the Philippines began to change in ways that would shape its identity forever. The Spaniards reorganized scattered barangays into larger towns, bringing people under centralized control. At the heart of every town stood a massive stone church, symbolizing both faith and authority. Catholicism spread rapidly, becoming deeply rooted in the daily lives of Filipinos. Priests and friars became powerful figures, guiding not only religion, but also education and governance. Baptisms, masses, and religious festivals became part of everyday life across the islands. But alongside faith came control, as Spanish authorities imposed new systems of taxation. Filipinos were required to pay tribute, often in goods, labor, or precious resources. Many were forced into labor systems known as polo y servicio, building roads, ships, and churches. Under the hot sun, countless Filipinos worked tirelessly, often with little reward. The contrast between Spanish elites and local populations became increasingly visible. Wealth and privilege were concentrated in the hands of a few, while many struggled to survive. Despite this, Filipino culture did not disappear. Instead, it adapted and evolved. Indigenous traditions blended with Spanish influences, creating a unique cultural identity. Language, clothing, and customs slowly transformed, reflecting centuries of interaction. Meanwhile, the Philippines became a key part of global trade through a powerful system. This system was known as the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, connecting Asia to the Americas. Massive ships carried goods across the Pacific Ocean, linking distant continents. Silver from the Americas flowed into Asia, while silk, spices, and porcelain moved westward. Manila became a bustling center of commerce, filled with merchants from around the world.
This trade brought wealth, but not equally, as most benefits went to colonial powers. Still, it connected the Philippines to a global network unlike ever before. Beneath this growing system, tensions quietly continued to rise among the Filipino people. Heavy taxes, forced labor, and abuses of power began to fuel resentment. Across different regions, revolts started to emerge against Spanish authority. Some uprisings were small and quickly suppressed, while others grew into serious threats. Rebel leaders gathered followers, driven by anger and the desire for justice. Battles erupted in villages, forests, and mountains across the islands. Spanish forces responded with strength, often crushing rebellions with force. Many rebels were captured, punished, or executed as warnings to others. Yet, despite repeated shikest, the spirit of resistance never disappeared. Each revolt kept alive the hope of freedom and independence. Over time, a new kind of resistance began to take shape. Not through weapons, but through ideas, education, and awareness. A new class of Filipinos began to rise, known as the Ilustrados. These were educated individuals who had studied abroad, especially in Europe. They were exposed to new ideas about freedom, equality, and human rights. When they returned, they brought with them a new perspective on colonial rule. They began to question the system that had controlled their homeland for centuries. Through writing, discussion, and intellectual debate, they sparked change. Newspapers, books, and essays became tools of resistance. Among these thinkers was a man who would awaken a nation. His name was Jose Rizal, a writer, doctor, and visionary. Rizal used his words to expose the zulm and corruption of Spanish rule. His writings opened the eyes of many Filipinos to their situation. He called for reform, justice, and equal rights for his people. But his ideas were seen as dangerous by colonial authorities. To them, awareness was more threatening than weapons.
Rizal was arrested, accused of inspiring rebellion through his writings. He was imprisoned, yet his spirit remained unbroken. His trial became a symbol of injustice under colonial rule, and in 1896, he was executed, a moment that shook the nation. His death did not silence his message. Instead, it ignited it. Across the islands, anger turned into action. Filipinos began to unite with a stronger sense of identity and purpose. A secret revolutionary group emerged from the shadows. It was known as the Katipunan, dedicated to ending Spanish rule. Members swore loyalty, often in secrecy, risking their lives for freedom. The time for reform was over. The time for revolution had come. And with that, the Philippines stood on the edge of one of the most important uprisings in its history. The revolution did not begin with a single battle, but with a powerful awakening that spread like fire across the islands. The Katipunan, once hidden in secrecy, now moved boldly, calling Filipinos to rise against centuries of oppression. Ordinary men and women, farmers, workers, and villagers answered the call, driven by hope and anger. Armed with simple weapons and unbreakable determination, they prepared to fight for freedom. The first clashes between Filipino revolutionaries and Spanish forces erupted with intensity. Across towns and provinces, battles broke out, marking the beginning of a nationwide uprising. The sound of gunfire echoed through forests and villages as the struggle for independence intensified. Filipino fighters used guerrilla tactics, relying on their knowledge of the land to challenge a stronger enemy. Spanish forces, though better equipped, struggled to contain the growing rebellion. The revolution spread rapidly, fueled by unity and a shared dream of independence. Leaders emerged, guiding the movement and organizing resistance across regions. Among them were figures who would shape the course of the revolution and the future of the nation. For the first time in centuries, Filipinos felt the possibility of controlling their own destiny. Victories, though hard-earned, boosted morale and strengthened the resolve of the people. But the fight was far from easy, and sacrifices were made on every side. Families were torn apart, and entire communities were caught in the chaos of war. Despite this, the revolution continued, driven by an unyielding desire for freedom. Then, in a twist of global events, a new opportunity appeared on the horizon. Far beyond the Philippines, a war broke out between Spain and another rising power. That power was the United States, entering conflict with Spain in what would become a global turning point. For Filipino revolutionaries, this seemed like the moment they had been waiting for. They believed this new power might support their fight for independence. American forces arrived in the Philippines, engaging Spanish troops in decisive battles. Together, Filipino and American forces weakened Spanish control over the islands. Spain's long rule was collapsing, and the end seemed near. In 1898, Spain was defeated, marking the end of more than 3 centuries of colonial rule. For Filipinos, this should have been the moment of freedom they had fought so hard to achieve. But instead of independence, an unexpected decision changed everything. Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States as part of a peace treaty. The islands were transferred without the consent of the Filipino people.
What was meant to be liberation suddenly became a new form of control. Hope turned into disappointment, and disappointment quickly turned into resistance. Filipinos realized they would have to fight once again for the independence they deserved. Tensions rose rapidly between Filipino forces and American troops. Soon, conflict erupted into what would become the Philippine-American War. This war was fierce, brutal,
and deeply destructive. Filipino fighters, though less equipped, fought with courage and determination. They used guerrilla warfare, striking quickly and disappearing into the terrain. American forces responded with overwhelming strength and modern weaponry. Villages were destroyed, and the effects of war spread across the population. Civilians suffered greatly, caught in the crossfire of a conflict they could not escape. Despite the hardships, Filipino resistance did not immediately fade. Leaders continued to inspire their people to fight for freedom. But over time, the imbalance in power began to take its toll. One by one, resistance strongholds fell under American control. The war left deep scars, both physically and emotionally, across the nation. Eventually, American forces established control over the Philippines. A new colonial period began, different in approach, but similar in reality. The United States introduced changes aimed at modernization and governance. Public education systems were established, bringing new opportunities for learning. Schools were built, and English was introduced as a common language. Infrastructure improved, with roads, bridges, and public institutions expanding across the islands. Filipinos were gradually given limited roles in governance, preparing for self-rule. While these changes brought development, the desire for independence remained strong. The dream of a free Philippines continued to live in the hearts of its people. Over time, the United States began to promise eventual independence. This led to the creation of a transitional government known as the Commonwealth. Filipinos were given greater control, taking steps towards self-governance. The future seemed hopeful as the nation prepared to stand on its own. But once again, global events would disrupt this path in a dramatic and devastating way. In 1941, the world was already at war, and the Philippines was about to be pulled into one of the darkest chapters in its history. Without warning, Japanese forces launched a powerful invasion, striking quickly and overwhelming defenses. The skies filled with warplanes, and explosions shattered the calm across cities and towns. Within a short time, the Philippines fell under Japanese occupation. What followed was a period of fear, hardship, and survival, unlike anything the nation had experienced before. Daily life changed instantly, as strict control and military presence spread across the islands. Food became scarce, and families struggled just to survive each passing day. Freedom was stripped away, replaced by uncertainty and constant danger. Yet even in the face of fear, the Filipino spirit refused to break. Across the country, resistance movements began to rise once again. Guerrilla fighters formed in secret, operating in jungles, mountains, and hidden villages. These fighters risked everything, launching attacks and gathering intelligence against occupying forces. Ordinary citizens became part of the resistance, helping in any way they could. Hope lived quietly, even in the darkest moments of occupation. Meanwhile, the global war continued to shift, and a turning point slowly approached. Allied forces began planning a massive effort to retake the Philippines. In 1944, liberation forces returned, marking the beginning of the end of occupation. Fierce battles erupted across the islands as Filipino and Allied troops fought side by side. Cities became battlefields, and the cost of freedom was once again incredibly high. Manila, once a vibrant city, was left in ruins after intense fighting. But despite the destruction, liberation brought renewed hope. The occupation finally ended, and the Philippines was free once again from foreign control. After years of war and suffering, the nation prepared to take its final step toward independence. In 1946, that moment finally arrived. The Philippines was officially recognized as an independent nation. After centuries of colonization and years of conflict, freedom
had finally been achieved. A new chapter began, filled with both hope and immense challenges. The country faced the difficult task of rebuilding from the devastation of war. Cities had to be restored, economies rebuilt, and lives put back together. Leaders worked to establish a stable government and guide the nation forward. Democracy became the foundation of the new republic. But the road ahead was not always smooth or easy. Political tensions, economic struggles, and social challenges tested the strength of the nation.
Yet through every difficulty, the Filipino people continued to endure. Their resilience became one of their greatest strengths. Decades passed, and the Philippines continued to grow, change, and evolve. Urban centers expanded, industries developed, and education improved across the country. Filipino culture flourished, blending ancient traditions with modern influences. Family, community, and faith remained at the heart of society. But there were moments when the nation once again faced internal struggles. Political unrest and public dissatisfaction began to rise during certain periods. The people, once again, found themselves standing at a crossroads, and once again, they chose to stand together. In a powerful display of unity, millions of Filipinos gathered peacefully to demand change. This movement would become one of the most inspiring moments in modern history. Without violence, without weapons, the people proved the strength of unity. Their voices echoed across the world, showing the power of peaceful resistance. Change came, and democracy was restored once more. It was a reminder that true power lies not in control, but in the will of the people. Today, the Philippines stands as a nation shaped by its past, but driven by its future. Its history lives on in its traditions, its language, and its identity. From ancient barangays to modern cities, every era has left its mark. The struggles of the past have become the strength of the present. The sacrifices of generations have built the foundation of a nation. And the spirit of resilience continues to define the Filipino people. The Philippines is more than just a country of islands. It is a story of survival, courage, and transformation. A story of a people who refused to be conquered, no matter how many times they were tested. And even today, that story continues to be written by millions who call these islands home. Because the true history of the Philippines is not just in the past. It lives on in its people, its spirit, and its unbreakable will to rise again.